everybody has been criticizing architects a lot, and it's okay to criticize them also, but I would also like to see that when we talk about preservation of heritage, even though the onus does lie on architects, it's not that dire, especially in Kashmir. So I'm actually happy that when I stand here before you today, I'm going to be presenting my students' work. And this is the adaptive reuse studio that I've taken for 2 batches. So I would like to encourage all of you to look at it as a more positive way, where even though everything is in shambles, but all hope is not lost. So I will be presenting the adaptive reuse of 2 houses. First is the Jamaan Heritage House, and the second one is the Quaja Mansulhavi. So this is the project that we undertook for the Semester 7 Design Studio, and this is also a unique opportunity and the first of its kind project in Srinagar, where we actually took a house that is existing, a living, breathing organism with a lived history. So Mr. Ishfaq Mir is the owner of this house. He's the current owner of the house with a strong historical value. And he was very forthcoming in this, and he really helped us and opened the doors of this house for us. Our students have enjoyed countless cups of tea in this house, and we've had very long, conducive discussions in these rooms. So when we started with the onset of this exercise, it was not merely a documentation exercise. When we talk about heritage houses, we often tend to have a tendency to just reduce it to a beautiful house that exists, something that has aesthetic value, but that is not true. It's too beautiful to be on the screen. Innovation in crafts, and many of the rooms still have these beautiful carpets lying around there. And so in these houses, we also talk about what is the emotive value of the houses, and what are people really feeling in these spaces? What are the lived stories in these houses? So the students went through this entire exercise of trying to understand what the surrounding context is. And then we went on to doing an extensive measure drawing exercise. So the measure drawing exercise essentially starts with a documentation of the measurements of the existing structure. So the first step is like an initial hand-drawn sketch, and because the entire team was working on it, what we did is this compound actually consists of a cluster of different structures. So we had a very organized system in place where we had a proper coding done, and we were trying to follow the international standards at at the level where proper conservation offices do this work. So we divided it into different blocks, and then all the team members started documenting it by hand, which was later then translated into these a set of extensive drawings. So these are all technically created AutoCAD drawings with accurate measurements, and there was emphasis, and you can see the level of detailing. And this is Semester 7 Studio, so this is not even people who are not even real architects yet. So this is the level of work that they ended up producing, and they also did a very extensive precinct analysis. They looked at the surrounding context, they tried to understand the interrelationship of the house with what is happening around. And we always believe that the architect is not really the person who should be the primary decision maker. That is something that I do agree with the people who did present this point of view earlier. So what we did is we went around and we spoke to a lot of people. So the shopkeepers who've been sitting in these lanes definitely know much more about you and I sitting in these rooms and drafting these drawings. And then we went on to do an extensive condition assessment of the structure. So a condition assessment basically tells you what is the current condition and what are the damages that are done. It could be a structural damage, it could also be a superficial damage, and an extensive condition assessment for each and every block was done. It is important to know that it was done not just for the exteriors, but it was also done for the interiors, for each and every block and for each and every room in all the blocks here. So after the condition assessment was done, then we also had a discussion about what are the proposals that can be done and how can it be implemented in an ethical way. After that, we came into the actual intervention part. So when we talk about adaptive reuse is not just conservation. It is not merely conservation. It is slightly different from that, because we believe that these are structures of a lot of value, and not just in terms of the stories, not in terms of just the heritage, but also economically. So when we talk about adaptive reuse, we talk about infusing life into these structures again. And this is actually the pause between when we are talking about preserving the past and building for the future, which is still taking the traditional values into the future. So this is that pause where we are talking about the existing stock of buildings that do exist and how can we actually use them for a different purpose. So here what we did is we had the students divided into two groups, and one of them went into an approach with where they wanted to do the conservation on the traditional methodology. So if you see that the blue lines there, the structure, the part that is added onto this is the intervention that the students proposed. And this intervention was not just an architectural intervention. The feasibility report was made for this, and it took into consideration the local bylaws, it took into consideration the economic aspects of it, it took into consideration the social, cultural and the environmental feasibility of their intervention also. So when you expose students to these ideas, they understand that each and every decision that we're making on the drafting table is going to have an implication. Each and everything costs. So when they made this proposal, they had to do an entire costing, because the main fundamental use of an adaptive reuse proposal is that it should be able to pay for itself. So they took actual statistics, they were able to figure out what the footfall of the current building with its structural integrity can hold. And they also spoke to the owner about what is a feasible option for them given their own current business endeavors. And what is the vision that they have for the future. So there were two approaches. One was a business as usual approach and the other one was a tourism-centric approach. And they did a proper phasing with a proper costing and the timeline with how many years it would take to actually implement these ideas. You can also see the sensitivity of the students here in terms of the material palettes, the colors and the originality of the actual structure. So the studio outcome was, we actually had an exhibition at Kani House, Ukra, and where the students presented their ideas, many of which were actually approved by the owner and he'd like to implement them at some stage in the future. And the second example that we recently finished is the Quaja Mansulhavi. So once we had done that, I think we also became more confident, and I think it is also really a lot to do with initiative. So I approached a lot of people, and when I'd seen this house, obviously many of you might be familiar with this house because it is featured in many films. And it is also used currently very largely both for shooting and also as a marriage hall for people who would like to get married here. They do it free of cost for the people who are in the neighboring areas, and they do charge a nominal amount for outsiders. So this batch was different because we had lesser students, we had only about 7 students, and this house was bigger in scale, it was more extensive. But I must re-emphasize again that people have been so forthcoming. So the owners of this house again really supported us. We've been walking into this house at all odd hours, we've been calling them, we've been asking them for keys. So they've really helped us, and even though they would have to be using this house for other activities, they always ensured that we had access to this house. So again here, if you see, we started with the site analysis and a detailed precinct analysis, and what I'd like to emphasize on is something that we really advocate for in our courses, that everything that we do, we don't take it as a hypothetical situation. So a proper in-depth ethnographic research was done, and here you can see that our students are speaking to all the people around. They are talking to the neighbors who very kindly offered them multiple cups of tea again, and the shopkeepers there, because there is a lot of value in the analysis that these people do. There is a lot of value in their inputs because they've seen these places transform through many years. So typically what we do is we do put a lot of value in these things as well, and I think the best design interventions are the ones that are informed by people. So it is a very people-centric approach. So we did an in-depth analysis of the location, services, climate, site selection. This is actually the way forward, because if you talk about places like Rajasthan, if you talk about those Havelis, people have done spectacular interventions where they've transformed them into boutique hotels and multiple things, and that association people have, because I also do believe that old houses in these structures also need to cater to modern needs. So they have to go through some sort of a transformation to be suited to these ideas. So after the site analysis and precinct study, again we went for a measure drawing. I really love that picture on the left side. You see how students also come up with innovative ways. I mean, I've taught for 5 years, and honestly, the kind of interest that students have in adaptive reuse is absolutely mind-blowing. They just fall in love with these houses, the physicality of it, when they're touching these surfaces. It's also like almost like therapeutic in many ways. So you see, students are really like innovative. They're very eager to learn about these practices. And when we talk about traditional architecture, it is not something that can be passed on to you through textbooks or like something that is too artificial a medium. So I believe like people have to be exposed to these houses. They have to be interacting with these houses. They have to be subjected to these spaces to understand how the places actually evolved. And again, this is the kind of outcome. So we do also encourage our students to actually do a lot of hand-drawn sketches and measurements, because we believe that the observations that you can capture through those traditional methods have immense value. And this is a model that the students actually ended up making. So just to see, like in terms of the human scale, you can see it's huge. So this model took 28 days just to cut the pieces, and then another 2 months for it to assemble. So I'm pretty sure this is the first of its kind scale model of a house in the whole city. My students are also entrepreneurs. They're planning to sell this to the owners now. So again, in terms of the intervention, we have two interventions. One was a traditional intervention and the other one was a modern intervention. So when you look at this, this might be very, it might be very disturbing, if I may say so. Because if you look at the intervention that the students have done here, it's something that you're not used to seeing, something that is too jarring and overpowering. But then again, this is also a practice that is accepted worldwide, and we do encourage our students to think out of the box. The concept here was that their intervention was that in the basement, in the courtyard that is there in the C-shaped house, they were going to have something that was something like a cafe, but it was inspired by the local baker. So the tandoor would be the core of the basement, and everybody would be seated around them, and then they'd be eating. And this funnel that you see going up all the way is actually an observatory to look at the stars, for stargazing. And this is the more conservative traditional approach that the students took. So if you see, it almost blends with the original house, and you cannot really like point out which is actually the addition. So the portion that you see on the left, what they've done is they've just added an extension here with a cafe, and they've also taken cues from the original existing house, how it is used as a marriage hall currently. So what they'd like to use is it in the future also is like as a marriage hall, but with better amenities and a lot of other services that are required. And ancillary activities like a cafe floor plan and other areas like retail spaces are also added to that. So the studio outcome here again was that we did an extensive and in-depth documentation of the house with a detail of what kind of materials were used. Then we also emphasized a lot on the legal aspects of it. So if you see, we take the land use and zoning classifications into consideration, we take the building bylaws into consideration, and these reports are good enough to be implemented actually. And then the condition assessment here as well, if you see. And finally, what were the proposed areas? So I would like to, I'm assuming that, like this should give us hope that even in the interim, like even when we do plan for the future, there is also a responsibility that all of us share as citizens of this place, that we should be taking these houses that do exist, these spaces that do exist, and interact with them. And believe me, it might look like it's a very expensive proposition, but it does pay in the long run. So I would like to encourage all of you to think about these things in this slide. And most of the students who worked on these projects, and they worked so hard on this project, I'm really proud of them. So let's give them a big round of applause.